Coming up on Network Africa. Head of Sudan's Sovereign Council, General Abdel Fattah Abdel-Rahim Burhan, dissolves the council and the cabinet, declaring a state of emergency across the country. The African Union, East African Body Intergovernmental Authority on Development, joined many other world leaders and organizations in condemning Sudan's coup, calling for an immediate return to dialogue. Plus, demonstrators take to Khartoum's streets in opposition to Prime Minister's arrest by the military, as several people wounded in reported shooting of live rounds at protesters. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Let's begin today with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
On Saturday night, one person was killed and 3 others injured in a bomb attack in Uganda's capital, Kampala. The explosion happened at a bar, killing a 20-year-old waitress and scattering panicked revelers onto the streets outside. Police say 3 suspected bombers disguised themselves as customers before planting the explosives under a table. The Islamic State group later said it was behind the attack. Bomb blasts in the East African country are rare. Kampala suffered a major attack by Somalia's Al-Shabaab in 2010 that killed dozens. The group said it had attacked Uganda as punishment for its deployment of troops in Somalia. Also on Saturday, a U.S. envoy underlined Washington's support for a democratic transition to civilian rule in Sudan during talks with the head of its ruling council and the Prime Minister. Jeffrey Feltman, a U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, met with Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of the Sovereign Council, and his Deputy General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. Tension between the civilian and military leaders who now share power have soared in the wake of an attempted military coup in September, which the army said it had foiled. But presently there are reports of another coup, with Prime Minister Hamdok said to be arrested and taken to an unknown location.
They've gone searching for him.
On Saturday, the Nigerian Correctional Service says 262 of those who escaped during an attack by gunmen on Friday night have been returned to the Medium Security Custodial Center. A statement issued by the Oyo State Command of the service says the prison was attacked at about 9:30 p.m. on Friday, with the invaders wielding sophisticated weapons, blowing up the yard wall and gaining entry after a fierce encounter with officers on guard. The jail attack in Oyo follows similar attacks in Imo State in April, where more than 1,800 inmates were freed, while another 266 prisoners were forcibly released in Kogi State last month. And finally on Saturday, Kenyan runner Agnes Tirop, a rising star in Kenya's athletic scene, was buried at a funeral attended by more than 1,000 people. Tirop was found stabbed to death in her home in the Rift Valley town of Iten on October 13th, in an incident that has shown the spotlight on violence against women in Kenya. Her funeral was held on the day she would have turned 26. The vicar presiding over her funeral service noted police arrested Tirop's husband, Ibrahim Ratik, in the coastal city of Mombasa last week on suspicion of her murder. Last month, Tirop smashed the women-only 10-kilometer world record in Germany. She won bronze medals at the 2017 and 2019 World Championships in the 10,000 meters.
Let's delve right into our main stories for today. Sudan is our major focus. General Abdel Fattah Abdel-Rahim Burhan is the head of Sudan's Sovereign Council. He has announced the state of emergency in the country, also dissolving the Sovereign Council that was overseeing the transition to civilian rule, as well as the dissolution of cabinet. This comes amid reports of a coup, with Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and 4 other civilian officials in detention. Pro-democracy protesters have taken to the streets of Khartoum, the capital, with 12 people said to be injured in clashes between protesters and the military forces. Many world leaders have condemned the military takeover in Sudan and called for opposing parties to dialogue. Even the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, that's the East African body, the African Union and other bodies are all calling for a return to civilian rule. Well, here's more in this report.
Tension is high in Khartoum as protesters gather on the streets on Monday morning amid reports of a military takeover. Angry crowds burning tires in the streets, with the army and paramilitary deployed across the city and restricting the movement of civilians. Members of Sudan's transitional government, including Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other civilian leaders, have been arrested. The Information Ministry on its Facebook page says the Prime Minister is asking Sudanese people to continue holding peaceful protests and defend the revolution, adding that joint military forces that earlier detained him in his house have been pressuring him to announce a statement supporting the coup. After refusing to endorse the coup, the army now moved the Prime Minister to an unknown location. Flights to and from Sudan's capital, Khartoum, are reportedly suspended. Khartoum International Airport closed and access to it blocked. TV and radio stations also were stormed by the military and internet access blocked.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
General Abdel Fattah Abdurrahman Burhan has now dissolved the Sovereign Council that was overseeing the transition to civilian rule and says the military will continue with the democratic transition.
Honorable citizens, I salute you. We stress here that the armed forces intend to complete the democratic transition until the country's leadership is handed over to an elected civilian government. The mechanisms of the transitional period were based on stages and a continued balanced agreement between the civilian and military leaders to move towards a general election from the basis of the work that has been carried out over the past 2 years. But this balanced agreement has turned into conflict. This is our country, and conflict between its institutions can threaten the unity and security of the country. This is what the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok stressed on the initiatives he launched in July and October of this year.
As expected, reactions have been trailing the situation in the country. The African Union Commission says it is deeply dismayed by unfolding events and calls for the release of all arrested political leaders and immediate resumption of consultations between civilians and the military. U.S. Special Envoy Jeffrey Feltman says the United States is deeply alarmed at reports of a military takeover of the transitional government. EU's Josep Borrell says the European Union is calling for Sudan's transition process back on track with an utmost concern. The United Nations is also urging Sudan's security forces to immediately release those who have been unlawfully detained or placed under house arrest. Sudan has made huge strides in normalizing ties with the West and unlocking much-needed funding streams. The promise of transition to democracy has kept many Sudanese and the country's allies hopeful, but all that could be at risk now.
Well, Sudan's military and civilian leaders have been at odds since they began sharing power in the transitional government set up in 2019. That's after the overthrow of long-serving military ruler Omar al-Bashir. Well, this coup is the latest crisis in a turbulent period for the country since the toppling of al-Bashir. This next report chronicles how Sudan got to this point.
Recent weeks have seen a rapid build-up of tension in Khartoum. A hostile takeover of power is what many in Sudan and beyond have feared could happen anytime. A pro-military sit right in front of the presidential palace in Khartoum was seen as choreographed to lead to a coup. No attempt was made to disguise its purpose. The protesters demanded that the military overthrow failed civilian leaders. It was an unusual attempt at legitimizing a military takeover using the guise of a popular protest. Nearly a week later, a counter-protest was held. This time, huge crowds came out in support of the civilian government. This coup phase is as a result of mistrust between the military and civilian leaders. The country is not supposed to be in that transition with civilians and military leaders running the country together on a joint committee known as the Sovereign Council. But the two groups have been publicly at odds. With more protests called by pro-democracy groups to counter a military coup, Sudan might be set for yet another period of showdown between the armed forces and the military.
Well, joining us now is David Otto, a security analyst, for more discussions on this. Thank you so much for your time. Sudan's military and civilian leaders have been at odds, since they began sharing power. Many feared this could happen, and some said, it was coming. Did you see this coming?
I think everyone must have seen this coming. This is not a surprise at all. Just last week, as your reporter said, there was a pro-military takeover protest, which called for the military to overthrow the civilian transitional government, which of course is a joint administration between the civilians and the military. So this shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this is all the remnants of the al-Bashir government, which lasted for decades. It left a huge gap in which, at this point in time, there is a fight between those who believe that, democracy should be the order of the day, and those who believe that the military should take over from the democratic system. So it's a battle of the loot that, came as a result of the overthrow of al-Bashir.
Well, back in August 2019, the Transitional Council was to rule for 2 years, and it was expected to end August next year. But obviously, that can't happen now because General Burban, who's the head of the Sudan Sovereign Council, has dissolved that council. Where does Sudan go from here?
I think they go to, the point of, level zero. What the military has done is to dissolve the Sovereign Council. And what does that mean? It means even if they do release, the Prime Minister and, the senior cabinet ministers that have been, under military arrest, there is a likelihood that, they will not be part of the next transitional administration. This is a copycat of what happened in Mali, where the military doesn't agree with the civilian part of the transitional government. They simply, launch another coup, overthrow them, and bring in people that they think they agree more with them. So it's chaotic, and it isn't looking very good in terms of, the expected 2 years transitional period that is expected to happen in August 2022.
Now, the AU has joined others in condemning the coup, calling for an immediate restoration to the transitional government. We have the US, the UN, EU, many of them, calling for a return to civilian rule. Do you think there was something regional bodies now could have done to avoid this?
I mean, the tire marks were there. All the strong condemnations from the African Union, from the United Nations. This is just normal. We had the same thing when the coup happened in Mali. The military junta will simply ignore them. I think what we should be talking about is much more of a proactive action. I think, all the condemnations, are very good, but, a little too late. What the focus should be is on Sudanese, but unfortunately they are very much divided between those who favor a military takeover and those who are pro-democracy. Now it is left to see which side is going to have the order of the day. But remember, Sudan is suffering from economic issues. I mean, they had blockades in the eastern part of the country, whereby supplies were being restricted by tribals, warlords who claim supremacy of the region. So I think what should happen now is for Sudanese to realize that this division that exists between those who favor the military and those who favor pro-democracy will just lead to further chaos. It is not the solution to the current issues that have been faced.
All right, then, we'll just have to wait and see how it all pans out. But thank you so much, security analyst David Otto. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the program. Fez's famous donkeys in Morocco, the only form of transportation for a long time, now have free shelter. We'll tell you more in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The United Nations says the delay in delivering humanitarian assistance to the Tigray region in Ethiopia is alarming, since some operations are already cancelled due to fuel shortage, adding to the already difficult humanitarian situation. According to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, a UN humanitarian flight bound for embattled Tigray that departed Addis Ababa was forced to turn back in the midst of its flight following the airstrikes on Mekele on Friday.
There are around 7 million people in northern Ethiopia in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. That includes over 5 million people in the Tigray region, and the other 2 million are split between Amhara and Afar. There are many, many people who have been displaced. Of those, many have been displaced from their home more than once, have been forced to flee, are without shelter. We have rates of acute malnutrition that are rising every day, and not just among children. Nearly half of the pregnant and lactating women in Tigray are also now acutely malnourished. So there are a multitude of factors that are hindering our ability to get the right amount of trucks in every single day. One of them, there are the approvals from the federal government. That differs on the basis of different supplies. The other is the challenges that we face at checkpoints along the route. So there have been times when we've had permission to move from the federal government and then have proceeded to move and we've stopped at a checkpoint. This is in areas that remain within the control of the Afar regional forces of the federal government. And we have also faced challenges where we've had community resistance, where communities have stopped us and prevented our ability to move because of their own frustration, because they are not receiving the assistance that they believe that they deserve.
Nigeria is making history today as the first country in Africa to adopt the digital currency, which is estimated to increase the country's GDP by $29 billion over the next 10 years. President Muhammadu Buhari made the comments during the official unveiling of the e-currency at the State House in Abuja. According to the president, this is one of the first few countries in the world to introduce the digital currency to its citizens. Digital currency is one of the most advanced payment systems and is already being used by countries like China, Bahamas, and Cambodia. The new payment system, which has taken 4 years to crystallize in Nigeria, is expected to drive financial inclusion, serve as a backbone for electronic payment, and also enable the movement of more people from the informal to the formal sector, hence scaling up the tax base of the country. On Sunday, the United Nations celebrated 76th anniversary of the entry into force in 1945 of the UN Charter. UN Day is now observed on October 24 every year since 1948. The UN Charter is the founding document of the great non-partisan institution that has been working towards global peace and equality. With the ratification of this founding document by the majority of its signatories, including the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United Nations officially came into being. Now, every October 24 has been celebrated as United Nations Day. In 1971, the United Nations General Assembly recommended that the day be observed by the member states as a public holiday. Here is the UN Secretary General's message on this year's anniversary.
76 years ago, the United Nations was created as a vehicle of hope for a world emerging from the shadow of a catastrophic conflict. Today, the women and men of the UN carry this hope forward around the globe. COVID-19, conflicts, hunger, poverty, and the climate emergency remind us that our world is far from perfect. But they also make clear that solidarity is the only way forward. We need to come together to tackle great challenges and advance the Sustainable Development Goals by ensuring that every person, everywhere, has access to COVID-19 vaccines sooner rather than later. By securing and upholding the rights and dignity of all people, especially the poorest and most disadvantaged, girls and women and children and young people. By seeking an end to the conflicts that scar our world. By making bold climate commitments to save our planet and living up to them. And by building global governance that is more inclusive, networked and effective, as detailed in my recent report, Our Common Agenda. The values that have powered the UN Charter for the last 76 years, peace, development, human rights, and opportunity for all, have no expiry date. As we mark UN Day, let's unite behind these ideals and live up to the full promise, potential, and hope of the United Nations.
To our latest stories now, donkeys and mules, which have long been the only form of transportation in the ancient city of Fez, can now sleep and eat inside a newly opened shelter. Now that's thanks to an initiative by a charity that has been providing free veterinary care for donkeys in the region since 1927.
In Morocco's ancient city of Fez, Jibello's aging donkey now has a place to stay, sheltered from the heat. A newly opened shelter is providing free care for the city's long-neglected donkeys, the main means of transportation up the narrow alleyways and stairwells of its walled Medina.
Before, we used to pay for the animals' accommodation, 70 dirhams per month, 60 dirhams for the stud, and 10 dirhams for the water. Now, they help us and treat the animal if it gets ill, and carry it if it cannot walk. May God reward them well. This is what I can say.
Located in northern inland Morocco, Fez has one of the Muslim world's best preserved historic towns, with architecture dating back to the 9th century. Donkeys and mules have long been the residents' main form of goods transportation within the old part of the city, a car-free pedestrian area.
The streets and alleys of the city are very narrow, and it's donkeys and mules that transport goods from the last point, where cars can't reach to shops and houses in the old city of Fez.
The shelter is part of an initiative by American Funduk, a charity that has been providing free veterinary care for donkeys in Fez since 1927. Today, the charity has a stable and animal hospital, treating countless animals a year. It also provides accommodation for elderly donkeys or those whose owners cannot afford to keep them. There are around 100 donkeys and mules working in Fez. The new shelter caters for around 30, but hopes to expand that number to 50.
Are you up for a challenge of eating a 2.2-pound burger? Well, if you are, a restaurant in Egypt organized the competition, awarding a $63 voucher to contestants who can finish this mountain of meat. Let's take a look.
5 contestants feast their eyes on a 1-kilogram burger in a competition organized by a local eatery. Dubbed the Four Seasons competition, the burger is topped with a hefty amount of malted cheese and garnished with 4 different kinds of condiments, usually a meal for 4 to 6 people.
We designed this competition for people who can really eat, for whoever can finish this burger by themselves. A lot of people participated in the competition when we first announced it. And today, you can see here, there are 5 contestants who join us. For whoever can finish the entire burger by themselves, will be awarded a 1,000 Egyptian pound voucher. One of them won, and he'll be awarded the 1,000 pound voucher from the restaurant.
But the brave few who have signed up to take part are served the cake-like dish, prepared with gloves for what promises to be a messy experience.
Honestly thought it was impossible for anyone to finish it. When I was eating the sandwich, I said to myself, this can definitely feed up to 4 people.
In Initially a marketing campaign for the launch of their newest burger, the competition became so popular that the restaurant decided to keep it going.
Or they just might need to hit the gym after that. That's it on the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.